Check your grade in Google Class, or gosh, not in Google Classroom, in the grade book in Infinite Campus. If you need to see, if you don't have Infinite Campus, I'll show you your grade. But I think everybody in here took the test, yes? Everybody was here for this class. I think this is my only class everybody's here for. So I'll get the rest of them and we'll go over them on Monday. Okay, so my question for the bell ringer is, I want you to find out what they have in common, because today's lesson is going to be factoring out monomials, which is just a fancy way of saying a term, and factor difference of two squares. So we're going into the second half of chapter P, which is factoring and rational expressions. So what did we decide this had in common? 5x. Put your phones away, please. And then if I'm going to factor this out, factoring out is just another name for dividing out. So I'm going to take each one of these and divide them by a 5 and an x. So the first one, if I have 5x to the fourth divided by 5x, that's just going to leave me x to the third, because the 5 over 5 become 1. And x to the fourth over x is x to the third. We just did that. So here I've got 10x squared over 5x. 10 divided by 5 is how much? 2. And x squared over x is x. And then negative 15x over 5x would be negative 3. The x's would simplify out. And then 25 divided by 5 is 5. And x to the fifth divided by x is x to the fourth. So this is an example of the first part of our objective today, which is just to factor out a monomial.
Once we factor it out, do you want us to put it in?
Oh, standard form? Oh, no. I mean, yours today will be.
That's it? You leave it like that?
There's nothing more you can do. There's nothing we can do, because those aren't like terms. Okay? So, we're going to start with, this is P4, factoring. And I'm going to split factoring up to 3 different days. Today's the easiest day because it's a Friday and the first day after the test. So most of this you're already going to know. One thing might be just a refresher, the difference of two squares. But the big factoring I'll do next week once we have a little break from school, because we need it. We need another 3-day weekend.
Yes.
That's coming up, though. I think we have one in like 2 weeks, so that's good. Okay, so if I give you something like this, let's look at this right here. 4x squared, negative 4x squared, plus 12x minus 16. I want to factor out a monomial, which is just, monomial is just a fancy word for one term. I want to factor out the one thing they have in common. So what is it they have in, these 3 terms have in common? Negative 4. So anytime, a good rule of thumb is, anytime there's a negative in the first term, you want to factor out negative whatever you're factoring, because you want the first term to be positive. Is it wrong if you don't? Not in my book. But just for factoring purposes, having this x squared positive makes it a little easier. So I'm going to take a negative 4 out, because each one of them has a 4 in it. So I'm left with an x squared in the first term. What am I left with in the second term?
3x.
What kind of 3x?
Negative 3x.
Negative 3x, because we're taking out a negative. We're dividing by a negative, so everything's going to change. So this is going to become positive, and then you have a 4. And that would be this answer. Now, if we were going a step further, which that's what next week is, you would look at this part here and see if we can do the X method with it. But that's Monday. Okay? For today, if it says factor out the common term, you did.
I really struggled with the X.
I'm going to teach it like it's the first time you saw it, so I think it'll be all right. Okay, now I'm going to throw you a little curveball. What if I have x minus 2, parentheses, times 2x plus x minus 2 times 3. Okay, this looks a little more mathy, but the thing I want you to focus on is any plus or minus to break up the terms. So this plus breaks up the 2 terms. I have a term here and I have a term here. What is it that's in common in the 2 terms?
X minus 2.
X minus 2. So sometimes what you're factoring out isn't just a monomial. It could be a binomial, something like this. There's not going to be a lot of these. But if I do that, I'm going to factor out an X minus 2. So that's coming to the front. And if I factor out an X minus 2 or divide out an X minus 2 in the first group, what am I left with?
Just 2x.
Yep, just the 2X. And then what am I left with in the second group? Just the 3. So that's what this would look like. You're not going to see a lot of these, but I think there are a couple because I have a big mark by this in my book. Easy enough? Yes? Okay. Let's move on to difference 2 squares. This is what's going to be a refresher for you. Difference 2 squares is when you have 2 perfect squares and a subtraction sign. So that's what the difference is, and then the 2 perfect squares. So it's something like this, x squared minus 9. Where the x squared is a perfect square, because what's the square root of x squared?
X.
Just x. And then 9 is a perfect square. What's the square root of 9? 3. So when I factor this, and this only works because I have the difference here, subtraction. When I factor this, I have a plus and a minus. You do the square root of the first term, it goes first, and the square root of the second term, it goes second. You guys remember that?
Yes.
These are the ones that when you first learned to factor you thought were super difficult because they look different, but they're actually the easier ones to factor. That's why I chose them for today. Because there's no work, it's just trying to figure that out. Okay, I've got one more I want to show you. Well, a couple more. Oops, that should be squared. 12x squared minus 3.
So once you take out,
Okay, for my first question is, we have the difference, you have subtraction. Do I have 2 perfect squares the way they're written right now?
no.
No. So this is right now not a difference 2 squares. Step 0 is, so the very first thing you want to do is look to see if they have anything in common you can factor out. What do they have in common?
3.
A 3. So I'm going to take a 3 out, and when I factor or divide a 3 out, I'm left with a 4x squared in the first term, and what in the second term?
1.
A 1. Now you look at this part in here, and I still have my difference. Is 4x squared a perfect square? Can you take the square root of it?
Yeah.
Can you take the square root of 1?
Yeah.
Yep. So you can factor this down further to difference 2 squares. Square root of 4x squared is what?
2.
2x. And then the square root of 1?
1.
1. And this would be your answer. So always look to factor out first. And then take the square root and plus and minus. Easy enough? Okay. Last one, I have this circled, so there must be one like this. If I have 16 x to the 4th minus 81. We have subtraction. Are these both perfect squares?
Yes.
Yep, they are. So I can do difference 2 squares. Plus, minus. Let's start with 81. That's easier. What's the square root of 81? 9. So that's your second term. And then 16x to the 4th.
That's 16 or 1?
That's
4x
16.
squared.
4x squared.
We can't factor this one.
We are. We just did. You can't factor anything out. Is that what you're asking? No. Well, and this one, you looked at it right away and it was a difference 2 squares. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, we're not done with this problem. Because I spy another difference of 2
Yeah,
squares.
you can do the 4 and 9.
This one right here. Why does this one not work? I'm pointing at it.
Minus.
Because it's plus, it's not a minus. Okay, you got to make sure it's a minus. So this is just going to stay 4x squared plus 9. But the 4x squared minus 9, now I can factor down to plus and minus. This becomes a what? What is it?
2x.
2x. And the square root of 9 is 3. And we have 4x squared plus 9 that we can't do anything with. So always make sure that you're simplified all the way down.
Why does it have to be a negative to get differences in square root?
Because the only way, if I FOIL this together, you get a negative 9 here because you have a plus and a minus. But most importantly, if I FOIL this together, this is a 6x and that is a negative 6x. So it simplifies out so you don't have that middle term.
Okay.
If I have a plus, if I do 2 pluses, the only way to get a plus here is to have 2 pluses or 2 minuses, then you're also going to have that middle term. That doesn't cancel out like that does. Okay? Good? Yes? Okay, so I have a worksheet for you guys. Yay! Yay! This I'm going to just say is due on Monday because I'm not here for my afternoon class. But let's take a look at that worksheet. Hang on.